I'm Julian Assange.
Roger, I'll get you into strength.
Editor of WikiLeaks. We've exposed the world's secrets.
Well, these documents belong to the United States government.
Been attacked by the powerful.
The United States strongly condemns.
Hey, quit asking questions.
He broke the law.
Illegally shoot the son of a...
For 500 days now, I've been detained without charge. But that hasn't stopped us.
Mike Beck.
Today, we're on a quest for revolutionary ideas that can change the world tomorrow. This week, I have two visitors. Moazzam Begg was imprisoned for years in Guantanamo as an Al Qaeda suspect. After pressure from the UK, he was released without charge in 2005. Together with Asim Qureshi, a former corporate lawyer, he now campaigns for other war on terror detainees with the organisation Cage Prisoners. The rule of law and due process are central to their campaign, and I want to know how this fits in with Sharia law. If the Muslim people formed a superstate, what would the legal system look like? When you were in Guantanamo, you signed a confession. I was armed and prepared to fight alongside the Taliban and Al Qaeda against the US and others, and eventually retreated to Tora Bora to flee from US forces when our front lines collapsed. I knowingly provided comfort and assistance to Al Qaeda members by housing their families, helped distribute Al Qaeda propaganda, and received members from terrorist camps knowing that certain trainees could become Al Qaeda operatives and commit acts of terrorism against the United States. So that language, is that how you normally speak?
No, I don't normally speak like that.
This sounds like it comes from a statute book.
Yeah. What brought me to the point where I would sign something like this was being tied up with my hands behind my back to my legs, with a hood placed over my head, being punched and kicked, listening to the sound of a woman screaming next door, I'm told, or led to believe is my wife, my children's pictures being waved in front of me, and being asked by these interrogators, when do you think you're going to see them again? What do you think happened to them the night that we took you from them? Where do you think they are right now? Well, all of these inferences, which clearly suggested to me that the only way out is to either give up and sign whatever it is that they want me to do, or to resist and to hell with what happens to my family. So that was a stark choice that I was presented with. And in the light of that, of course, yeah, I signed it.
Yeah. So when you got out, you joined Cage Prisoners and fought for people that you had known in Guantanamo and elsewhere to be released or treated with due process. And so now we have this sort of rather incredible position where we discovered a WikiLeaks US Embassy cable from 2010 about you. And this is from the embassy, US Embassy in Luxembourg, writing back to Washington. You had been in Luxembourg campaigning for Luxembourg to take Guantanamo Bay detainees. Mr. Begg is doing our work for us. His articulate reasoned presentation makes for a convincing argument. It is ironic that after 4 years of imprisonment and alleged torture, Moazzam Begg is delivering the same message to the government of Luxembourg as we are. Please consider accepting Gitmo detainees for resettlement. How does that make you feel that the Obama administration now sees you as their ambassador?
Well, it doesn't do a great deal for my street credibility, as it were. But suffice to say that if the words of the US ambassador had been taken, that would be one thing, but I'm pretty certain that I'm still regarded as an enemy combatant.
Let's talk about this extreme targeting. Mm-hmm. So Cage Prisoners' role is to try and try and get prisoners released, or at least have due process for them, to advocate on their behalf. But now we see the US administration is using drone strikes to kill Muslim radicals around the world. Is Cage Prisoners out of a job? Because, you know, you imprison someone in Guantanamo Bay, they become a political problem. Yeah. If you kill them, they're a political problem just at the point of death, but afterwards, no man, no problem.
we wish that we were out of a job. I mean, we'd love to be out of a job. And this is the sort of thing that every day when you're dealing with cases, they are very painful to deal with as individuals and as and the family members of people we're advocating for. I used to say that Bush was the president under whom extrajudicial detention was taking place, and Obama is the president under whom extrajudicial killing is taking place. So Obama did promise a change. Remember, he said a change has come to America, and this is it. The change is from extrajudicial detention to extrajudicial killing.
Asim, in a 2006 rally, you said, in quite a fiery language, when we see our brothers and sisters fighting in Chechnya, Iraq, Palestine, Kashmir, Afghanistan, then we know where the example lies. When we see Hezbollah defeating the armies of Israel, we know what the solution is and where the victory lies. We know it is incumbent upon us, all of us, to support the jihad of our brothers and sisters in these countries, wherever they are facing oppression by the West. I saw that video, and to me it looks like a fiery Muslim preaching jihad. Why did you say this statement?
Well, I mean, this comes in the context of the Israelis having bombed Kana, and they killed masses of civilians there. This is in 2006. Now, I mean, what you have to understand is that, as far as Muslims are concerned, at the moment, they are under attack in countries, all over the world. There are, hundreds and thousands of people dying. And effectively, our concept of jihad, at least in its current iteration, is that, as Muslims, we have the right to defend ourselves. There is, no point of saying that, these people are being killed, that there's alien occupation, colonial domination, racism taking place, and that these people, they shouldn't be allowed to defend themselves, that they should just keep them being slapped and killed and raped, and that they're not allowed to defend.
And defense here means military resistance.
Of course, and all of these countries should be allowed to. I mean, that's not the full speech, and I talk within that speech as well about how we as Muslims in the UK, should be supporting, these people by lobbying, by campaigning, by effectively trying our best to support them, and I very much believe that it's part of our obligation to do so. I mean, the point is it's not about conflict being the solution, and that's something that we advocate against ourselves, myself particularly. I don't believe that violence is the solution, that dialogue is the only solution. However, at the same time, I believe that everybody has the right to defend themselves.
But what about this defense, Belsan, as an example, in Chechnya, this attack on the school?
Of course.
300-something people died. I mean, there were all sorts of military problems in Chechnya, the local population, the Russians. That is a type, they would say, those Chechen terrorists, that they were defending Chechnya in that manner. But I mean, is that type of defence a defence that you accept?
It's not something that I agree with myself. I don't think Islamically that it's the right way about doing things. I don't live in those circumstances. I can't Islamically, jurisprudentially make a statement about anything because I'm not a Muslim scholar. I have disagreements with the way Al Qaeda uses its tactics around the world. I don't think it's productive in terms of what the end goal it's trying to achieve. But at the same time, the general concept, and this is what I was talking about in that speech, is that people have a right to defend themselves, and they should not be denied that right simply because America believes that it holds all the moral authority in the world, and that's the point that I think we're trying to make.
Point to be made just about jihad, because it's this term that's so used so blatantly and without people really understanding what it is. And we supported jihad. Let's just admit this. The British government brought over Mujahideen fighters in the 70s and the 80s, trained them by the SAS in Snowdon. Britain supported jihad again just a few months ago when they were supporting Mujahideen fighters who called themselves Mujahideen in Libya against Gaddafi. So you've got this play with words within the media to say, well, jihad is bad except for when we say it is. And this is the sort of thing that we, as cage prisoners, as an organisation that's Muslim, like to introduce and explain to people that you're being hoodwinked by the politicians and the media when they use this term about belief system.
So now I'd like to give two tricky questions. What did Bush do right? You know, he would argue that there were no terrorist attacks of any significance on the mainland of the United States post-2001. And how did he achieve that? Well, if I was arguing his side, I would say he achieved that by all sorts of surveillance, preventative detention, terrorizing people, absolutely terrorizing people, with examples of Guantanamo Bay, detention without trial, arbitrary execution, etc.
I think in your answer to your question, what did Bush do right? I don't know if he did anything right in terms of the war on terror. There was a Bush prior to that, and interesting, you've got some Al Qaeda type scholars in Saudi Arabia who've actually said that we supported you coming to power. That's interesting. That they actually said that we were happy when you came to power. You seemed to be a person who was of the same mind as us. And then, of course, he said the famous words.
Scholars.
Yes. He said that this crusade is going to take a while. And once he said that, everything went wrong from that point onwards.
What about bin Laden? What did bin Laden do right?
Well, if you take a look at what he did at the time when the Soviets occupied Afghanistan and the Americans were supporting him, he did everything right from that point onwards. He did everything right because he was being supported by the West, and that was the evidence for it. What he did wrong...
I don't mean what the West believes. I mean,
no,
what do you believe?
No, I know. And I think that was right, too. I think that was right for the Afghans to be able to liberate themselves with the support of everybody who was helping them was absolutely right. But as far as the ordering of the attacks, if that's what he did, and that's still, I don't know, in my mind, it's not been established because he didn't have due process. If that's what he did, it was wrong because it started a chain reaction that we've not been able to recover from since. But
why do you think that he, as a leader, why was he successful?
I don't know if he was a leader, first of all. I mean, I think that the perpetuating myth of Al Qaeda in the Maghreb and then Europe and all of the Al Qaeda franchises were all part of, well, if you're going to say we're Al Qaeda, we'll be Al Qaeda. But I don't think it really existed in the way that we've been told, and it is a great myth about how big it was and its reaches. As a person, as a figurehead for people, people simply saw, if you go in the Muslim world, the attitudes are different. Most of them don't agree with 9/11, they don't agree with targeting civilians, and there's been a great deal of that taking place in the Muslim world, so they don't agree with that at all.
What was the view in the Muslim world about him before 9/11? Was he well known?
I don't think he was. I don't think he was greatly known. I think, if anything, in the Gulf countries and those people who'd been part of the struggle, the fight against the jihad against the Soviets, he was known in that circle of people, definitely, because of his personal sacrifice and his integrity and all of the things that he'd done, which you would not expect a billionaire to do. But after that, I think his influence has been... it's been seen for something greater than it really is. People were going to... It wasn't... The United States didn't just attack Osama bin Laden. They didn't just go after him. They went after nations, and they killed tens of thousands of people in the process. So bin Laden may have come and gone. It's irrelevant, because those symptoms that bin Laden was addressing are still there.
How would you primarily describe yourselves? As Muslims, as liberationists, as people who like rule of law processes, as intellectuals? What?
All of the above.
You know, I don't think some of those things don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive to one another. You know, being Muslim means standing up for justice. It means being a little bit radical. It also means being a little bit conservative. You know, it means all of those things at the same time. You know, God says in the Quran that be just even if it goes against yourself. You know, that's a very, very important, part of who we are, what our character is, that, even if it meant effectively having to give evidence against ourselves in some way, that we would always do what was most just in any circumstance. That's how we formulate our characters. Justice is, in many ways, more important than many other things. But you can still make a difference.
In struggling for individuals' liberation from imprisonment and being imprisoned yourself, and the struggle for a people's liberation, a group of people, their liberation. Do you think this is incompatible with submission to a god?
You're in Britain, and thus you have to deal with other wills of other people and other governments to submit to.
Oh, and I find it extremely disconcerting, yes, and annoying. But,
right.
Don't you find it annoying to submit to the will of God?
Well, we all have, we're human beings, we have to submit to something. We all have to submit to some kind of law all the time. And I think my point is about the Muslim world in particular, and not about the West here. The West has nothing to worry about in terms of us communities living here. We understand the rules and the regulations, and we submit to them, even if we don't like it in some cases. But we're talking about in the Muslim world, I think that's really important to recognize that right across from the Maghreb all the way to Indonesia, that is a massive population. So 1/5 of the world's population want this, and that's just from within the Muslim community, let alone what...
Sorry, they want what? They want the rule of law?
They want, yeah, but I'm saying that they want Islam or the religion to be a part of their life in terms of governance and in terms of their daily living routine. And I think that's a choice that we should respect. The problem is we have not respected that for the past 100 or so years.
Now, what do you think about the desire to unite Muslim peoples into one Islamic caliphate? And one central point, I suppose, of rule of law, and that law being Sharia. Do you see that as a possibility?
I mean, I think right now, the way that we're seeing how the Muslim communities around the world are developing, I mean, especially, I think the Arab Spring has given Muslims a lot to think about. You have different phenomena emerging in each country, and it's very, very different from place to place. So what's happening in Tunisia under Rashid al-Ghannouchi is very, very different to what's happening in Egypt under now the Muslim Brotherhood and the An-Noor party. So I think what we're seeing is that the kind of statements that were made previously, and you know, a lot of Muslims will agree, generally speaking, with the concept of the Muslims uniting together, that, you know, the re-establishment of a caliphate. I mean, these are very kind of, you know, orthodox positions that, you know, people have always held. But what is the substance of those positions? How does that formulate in terms of the modern world? And we're going to be watching Muslims all over the world, what's happening in Tunisia, what's happening in Egypt, what's going to happen in Libya as they try and organize themselves better with a lot of interest, because these guys are going to actually, for the first time, really have the authority to try and, in a normative way, balance up, you know, what the Islamic law, what the Sharia requires of us as Muslims, alongside living in a Western, should I say, in a modern world.
What does your ideal system look like? Is it common law, Sharia law, some amalgam between the two?
Well, these are big questions, and you know, we mostly deal with the issue of people detained without charge or trial and stick to it. We don't really. That's not part of our remit. Is not solving the world's problems. But you know, speaking on a personal level, I think this is the great fear. When they talk about this system of the caliphate, everybody gets terrified. But in essence, what would it be? It would be a union of countries where they all speak Arabic. For goodness sake, if in Europe, where we've got 50 different languages, and people are trying to come together and have no states and one monetary union and so forth.
Well, they're trying to introduce the European Union, which has caused me a bit of grief, actually.
Of course it has. Of course it has. Yes, and extradition warrants which allow people to be moved in freely, yes.
I'm not sure big super states are actually the way to go.
Right. It's not necessarily to be a but here the difference, I mean, what I'm talking about is what links Morocco to Iraq? What are the links? Cultural, and most important, language.
Yes.
Everybody, you know, you can go to Morocco and speak Arabic, and every country right in between. There is something, and that's a unique fabric of a society. And what separates us in Europe is the language. It's primarily language.
Yes.
And so you've already got that there, and because historically it used to be there before. And if you look at the countries,
right, but I mean they already speak Arabic. So
right.
What would be the new thing?
So what would be new is the unity would not be based upon their own personal nationalism, And this would be the difference, because that's what it used to be like before. Their nationalism had only been instilled after somebody came along and on a map of Africa drew a line and said, you're Libyan, you're Algerian, you're so-and-so. If they are able to return to, in the modern context, of course, to something that allows that sort of unity, it would give them a great deal of strength. And I think that's where the worry is in terms of the West, is that we will have another powerhouse here established at our southern doorstep that we don't want.
Now, what about what type of rule of law would you envisage?
Well, I mean, look,
I'm not talking about that is actually practical to implement now. I mean, that if you were Allah for a day, what would you do? We
don't really use those terms of reference, but Islam is a normative legal system, just like any other. We have effectively statute and case law like any other normative legal system anywhere in the world. And so for us, there is a rule of law that we have to follow. You know, in many ways, some of the complaints that you often hear about the way that Islam is implemented, or the Sharia is implemented, is the fact that it totally goes against what the rule of law requires from the Sharia, from the normative legal system itself. So, for example, you know, when you consider the issue of stoning for adultery, the requirement, the evidentiary standard, is 4 live witnesses to the act of sexual relations at the time that it's taking place. From an evidentiary perspective, it's almost impossible to establish that unless it's some kind of party that's gone a little bit weird. You know, it's very, very difficult to establish that criteria. So the fact that you have
but the punishment,
that punishment
stoning to death.
Yeah, the fact that you have the punishment even taking place means that effectively the rule of law is being abused at some point, because it's impossible to establish that evidentiary standard.
But you would agree with stoning to death for a lot?
I mean, the whole point is that that was never envisaged, really.
But I mean, you would agree?
I agree with the Islamic concepts of how we practice our punishments, okay, generally speaking, what they are. Whether or not they're even
I think, Julian, what's a really important point in all this?
I think it's important. So
sure.
Cage, well, the difference between cage prison is your personal opinion. I accept
this
that.
Is purely my own personal opinion.
Purely your personal opinion is that the death penalty is okay.
From an Islamic perspective, yes, as long as all the due process elements are met, then it can be, depending on if all the elements are there.
I think that, you know, what happens is when people discuss Sharia, everybody discusses crime and punishment, or the punishment, the hudud. So what we're talking about here is the hudud, the punishment aspect. That's not Sharia. The Sharia is the law. And
yes, that's the whole rule of law process.
Right, it's the whole process.
Which is what I want to get at.
Yeah. And none of us are really sort of qualified to talk about it in the way that it should be discussed in terms of a country establishing itself and formulating these rules. And primarily because no country has applied them since the fall of the caliphate of the Ottomans. So it's in essence a theoretical discussion. That's something we have to develop.
Do you think this, if you go back to the Ottomans and the Ottoman Caliphate, the absence of an Islamic state that most people would want to live in, it seems. Would you agree that there's not too many? Maybe Oman is it? I'm not sure.
Let me tell you a very interesting point. When the caliphate was abolished, one of the first, the Ottoman Caliphate was abolished. One of the first people to advocate for it was Mohandas K. Gandhi, and the reason why is because he understood that this was something that was central to the fabric of Islamic history, and so I think the call for the establishment of a caliphate, or perhaps not even using that word, but a united Muslim bloc, is something that most people would want.
Don't you think Tunisians would go, we're Muslims, we're in Tunisia, we speak a bit of French, a bit of Arabic, and we want self-determination, and self-determination is best met by not palling up too much with Egypt because the numbers in Egypt are much larger.
I think, of course, that, you know, and the Arabs have attempted it. They've tried to do the different organizations of just Arab unity, but this goes beyond Arab unity, and this is, I'm talking about Islamic unity, which includes Turks, it includes Iranians, it includes Pakistanis and Indonesians. It's huge, it's massive.
But why have unity?
Well, why would Europe want unity? The whole point of unity...
I think the reason Europe wanted unity actually was set up by the United States to make the United States of Europe that would be economically powerful enough in order to combat the Soviet Union. That's why I think.
And I think that the reason.
And now it's a trade bloc.
Right. The reason for unity would probably be economics, of course, defence, of course, and you know, harking back to a history where you could travel from one point to the other unhindered because you're a citizen of this land, and that this land isn't divided based upon colonial principles.
So you get a Muslim passport.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know about that.
But I mean, just the same way as you have in Europe. You have the ability to travel within Europe and very, very freely. Part of your own nation.
And you have a right to work in any country.
Right.
Possibly.
Very interesting.
We'll see.
Okay, so now let's come back to cage prisoners. There's all sorts of things to do in life. Why are you doing cage prisoners? Asim?
I'm supposed to be a corporate lawyer, so I find myself changing quite radically. But, I mean, seeing Guantanamo, seeing indefinite detention without charge in the UK, seeing the Extradition Act, you know, all of these things culminate in telling you, well, actually, the law is being abused here, and for a very specific purpose. And all of that kind of convinced me that I needed to be involved with something that was working against these policies. And cage prisoners is an important voice for Muslims. It's an empowering voice. It's one that we hope tells Muslims that you can actually stand up for yourself. You can stand up for the right thing without feeling as if you're doing something criminal.
I think for me it's obvious. It's part of something that I've been affected by. Something that I am constantly, even if I didn't want to do it, I'd be affected by it to this day. So it's something that I think people will say that it's something called survivor's guilt, that you will survive a particular trauma, but other people left in that situation are not surviving, so you have an obligation upon yourself to fight for them. I feel I have a not just a moral and religious, but also a duty based upon my own personal experience and ability. If I know I can do it, then I have to do it, and I think I can do it. I'm just interested, have you got any a thought, a plan, if you're, you know, may God protect you, but if you're sent over there to the US,